Not another reviewer.
Yes, another reviewer. Last year I reviewed the Basilisk game's indie RPG premiere, Eschalon Book 1, and after several of your, constructive comments, I was convinced to give the sequel, Eschalon Book 2, released in 2010, a fair try, as many of the things I complained about were apparently fixed according to you guys. Character creation is still pretty much the same. You still choose the race, beliefs, class, and specialties of your character, but at least this time you can play as a female, and the character portraits don't look like they were ripped directly off of IMDb. Now let's see here, that looks like a good build, and we'll go with this portrait, but what to name her? Shit, let me just, hang on, okay, there's always one of those RPG name generators on Facebook. I just have to, just give me a second. Oh, Jesus! That infection really looks awful. I should probably call him. I still have a chance anyway. Oh, here we go. First name starts with A, so Lyra, and last name starts with R. Okay, here we go. Lyra Moitrog. Why not? It works for me. Oh, hey, look! I can choose the difficulty of the game now! In order to tweak the difficulty, you can add a food system, just like in Fallout New Vegas, add durability values to your equipment, just like Diablo, make it so you're unable to utilize save scumming, and a thing I don't even understand. You can pick any number of the options to tweak your difficulty to affect your endgame score? I'm not even going to talk about that. In fact, forget I even mentioned it. From what I can tell, the difficulty tweaks are so minor that they're pretty much unnecessary. The story of this game is no longer veiled in mystery either, as you're given chunks of it fairly regularly as you progress. You find out that despite the goblins being the main threat in Thamor and your conquest over them in the previous game, the Tarax were the ones to rise up and attack. Already being in the midst of constant turmoil due to the events of the first game, the government fell, making everything you did in the first game completely meaningless. So you left by sea to settle in a far-off land called Mistfell. Sometime after these events, you wake up in your cottage where you find a note on your doorstep instructing you to meet a man at the inn in town. When you do, he introduces himself as Darius, a fellow member of the guild you also belong to, unbeknownst to you. Despite everything that was explained to you in the first game, as you're the same adventurer, you've completely forgotten everything. You're now being reminded that you belong to a guild called the Crius Vindica, charged with keeping the Crux apart. They're believed to be 4 of them, and since the Tarax have 1, it's also believed that they're trying to gather them all. Before Darius can give you more information, he's killed right in front of you. It is now your task to find your guild and stop the Tarax. Now, as far as the differences between the first game and the second, I'll have to go over what I complained about in my last review. The first thing I mentioned was the pace of the game, which was actually a bug on my end. Just a tweak of a simple setting in the launcher and the game wouldn't have ran so slow. Even with movement back to normal, the pace of the game is still pretty slow, so that hasn't really changed. It's still turn-based and each turn is still set at the speed of goddamn awful. My next complaint was how quick travel worked. The quick travel network in this game is actually a lot better. There are very few places in the world where you'd have to go that don't have a quick travel beacon nearby, which makes getting around a little more fluid. Sometimes you have to bounce off one beacon to get to another, or sail to and from an island you can't otherwise reach, but it was greatly improved upon. There was a portal spell included that I never used, because by the time I got it, I was already at the end of the game. It's a 3rd tier spell, so you're required to have 11 points in your Arcane Elemental skill in order to use it, making it fairly useless for non-magic oriented characters. But, as I already said, it's really unnecessary. They basically put in 2 solutions to one problem. Another thing that aggravated me about the game was the lack of a party system, and unfortunately that went unchanged. You're still at it alone, and frankly I'm not even sure why. I'm sure you remember me mentioning that for a little help you can pull enemies into town and the townsfolk will attack, but the townsfolk are way more prepared for battle than you. You don't realize how truly weak and pathetic you are until you fight an enemy in town, have a lot of trouble, and watch a townsperson take it down with no effort whatsoever. There's a side quest where you find a man camping near Wolfenwood that you would have to pass through to get to the town of Everdale. He claims that the owner of the magic shop in Everdale is a werewolf, and he wants you to kill him and bring back his pelt. You're in for a fierce battle here, and being I was a magic user, I had to back off from him so my mana could regenerate. Out comes the blacksmith that manages to kill him and make it so I get no experience for the kill with her bare hands. I attempted to stave him off physically since I saw her do it with little to no trouble, yet I keep missing and she just punches it in the face until it dies. That tells you that the two-hit mechanic is still the same. You need a load of dexterity and a really high skill level to be able to use weapons. It also apparently depends on the creature. I had a skill level of 12 with the weapon I was using and 30 dexterity, and I still couldn't land hits near the end of the game. This is in stark contrast to magic characters whose attacks are effective from skill level 1. They can even do more damage! The most powerful weapon I found had a base damage of 11, but it wasn't one I was skilled with, so I was stuck using a weapon with a damage of 8. I had a strength of 37, but I could still only hit for a maximum of 27 damage, where a magic user with the same skill level and arcane elemental can deal up to 36 points of damage, and you don't even have to be right next to the creature or have any sort of attribute set high. Yeah, the game has bows and throwing weapons, but being you can only control the light around yourself and not the enemies you're aiming at, you can't always rely on that either. Just like the last game, Magic has no such restriction. You can disable your torch or lantern so the enemies can't see you, press the tab key, which now displays a delightfully convenient list of all the spells you have hotkeyed, and blast away unopposed. You don't even really need mana potions either. I went through most of the game without them because you can just walk away from the screen the creature's in, or just get far enough away from him and camp back all your mana. I know how I complained about the last game saying that camping was impractical, but they seem to dial down the encounter rate a smidge so you can get a good 24 hours rest. When it does happen, they're still fairly overwhelming and there are still locations where this is constant, but there aren't many. There is one downside, other than the simple fact that the new weather effects that have been added can dampen your spell damage. It's nigh impossible to use an equipped weapon, decent gauntlets, and a shield at the same time, as you have weight restrictions depending on your strength as to whether you can cast spells while carrying your equipment. This would be well and good if it was consistent. Unfortunately, it falls under one of those hidden stats. I thought I could buy equipment, equip it, and cast a spell to see if I was still good to go. As it turns out, you can cast spells no matter how much you're carrying until you're around a hostile enemy. Essentially, you have no clue of this restriction until you're facing combat and have an amazingly high chance of dying. Shields in this game are essentially useless anyway, as you can't carry a torch while you have a shield equipped, and with how heavy most of them are, you can't cast spells either. The replacement for the torch to allow you to carry the shield is a magic spell. Not using a magic character? I'm pretty sure I just explained why that's a bad idea. But if you really want to do it, then good fucking luck! Being I just brought up camping and ranged weapons being useless in the dark, it's fairly obvious the day and night cycle is still there, and it's still completely unnecessary, so moving on. For dungeon crawling, I talked about how a common theme in the first game is backtracking. While that's still the case, not to such a severe degree. Instead of having to go down a long, winding path to find a locked door that you have to find a way to open, it'll generally be just off the path. You can either take care of it right there, or make a note of it depending on what kind of character you're playing. Finding the proper method to open a door, or a key, doesn't feel as tedious as it did in the previous game. It feels more straightforward. Unfortunately, the dungeon crawling doesn't completely lend to improvements, as most of the underground segments feel the same. I praised the previous game for its varying environments, but this one took a step in the wrong direction, making most cavern segments look and feel pretty much the same, making for very repetitive gameplay. Finally, on to what I really ranted on about in the last video. Diseases and curses. Diseases don't seem to be as common in the sequel. You can still get them from traps and rats, but other than that, I didn't seem to have to deal with it very often. Which figures because I had an elixir for curing disease the entire fucking game. I have no idea if curses are even still as much of a bother, as I downright refuse to deal with them by making my character an atheist. They were just too bothersome in the first game. I didn't even want to chance it. So despite a few changes, like allowing you to play as a female, letting you make minor and unnecessary tweaks to the game's difficulty, and slight changes to gameplay balance, doesn't really make up for the fact that the story has lost a lot of depth and mystery between the two games. Character creation is still incredibly unbalanced, and enemies and NPCs are incredibly strong, while you increase in power about the same pace of the gameplay, which is basically molasses on a cold winter morning. All in all, it's the same game, just shat out and sold at around twice the price. I don't know, Tom Ridgewell. You're gonna have to do better than that if you want to earn my praise. Maybe after releasing the same game twice, people started to realize what you were doing and you had to shape up for Eschalon Book 3 that was released February of this year. We shall see. We shall see. Okay, so after all this, you still want to play the game and don't want it spoiled for you. Well, you're going to want to stop watching this video now. Seriously, I'm about to blow the lid off the big reveal at the end of the game here, and I don't want anyone getting mad at me. So I'm just going to go ahead and give you a few seconds to leave this video and go watch some Game Grumps or something. Aliens. It's fucking aliens. Now, I'm being fucking serious here. The Oricor, the mythical race the Commonwealth Guard were supposedly fighting throughout the entire first game, the incredibly mysterious, powerful, and resourceful race of beings that were never actually seen, they're fucking gray aliens. They couldn't even come up with an original look for them. They took the generic gray aliens straight from Roswell and slapped them into this game. There weren't even any clues or anything leading up to this aside from the strange devices in the final floor of the final area of the fucking game. There's building up to a twist, and then there's just downright M. Night Shyamalama ding-donging it. Apparently a group of Oricor called the Assembly, who are responsible for the Crius Vindica, crash-landed their spaceship on this planet. While repairing the ship, they felt they needed to protect the power source from members that would decide that they would take smaller ships on their own, leaving behind the others. They split up the power source into 4 pieces and scattered it throughout Eschalon to be discovered by the people who would protect them as the Crux. One member of the Assembly, known as the One, broke away from the rest of the Oricor and is psychically influencing several people and creatures in the region to do his dirty work. He's discovered a smaller ship that only requires 2 of the Crux to power it, and the Torax, who are under his control, already have the Crux of Ages. As the main quest progresses, you find the members of the Crius Vindica. Corin, the Guildmaster, tells you need to destroy one of the Crux to keep them from coming together. But in order to destroy one, you have to use another Crux. So you acquire the Crux of Fire, and after a boss battle, stroll right into where the Torax are holding the Crux of Ages. Inevitably, the One shows up and Corin is killed. So far, every time you get actively involved, everything gets all fucked up and you unwittingly help those that you're trying to stop. Amazing! Who taught this guy how to write? I bet you the third one ends in the exact same way. Brilliant!